This is a port old fashioned and it is a lovely little fruity riff on the classic cocktail. Let me show you how to make it. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the Whiskey Nerd, and like I said, this week I'm making a lovely little fruity riff on an old fashioned. I'm making a port old fashioned, and I got the inspiration for making this cocktail when I tried out this whiskey right here. It's a collaboration between Irish Malts and the Teeling whiskey distillery. It is an Irish whiskey, a single pot still Irish whiskey that was aged for its entire life in Bordeaux red wine casks. So it has a really kind of unique flavor. If you want to see the review of this whiskey, I'll put a link to it up there. I'll put a link down below and you can check it out. But it has this really great kind of combination of sweet caramel and then that red wine influence. It also comes in at a cask strength of 59.9% alcohol, so that's almost 120 proof. So I knew I wanted something sweet and light to kind of liven up the whiskey a little bit, otherwise it might have overpowered a lot of other ingredients. Speaking of the other ingredients, this cocktail also uses a port wine. I've chosen a ruby port here. There's ruby port and there's tawny port. They have a lot of similarities, but a ruby port is a bit brighter, sweeter, fresher, more fruity, whereas a tawny port has been aged, has more of those kind of caramelly notes, which I know would go well with this, but the other ingredient here is maple syrup, and just a little bit of maple syrup to help add a bit of sweetness, add a bit of kind of more dimension to the cocktail. And like I said, with this whiskey, a lot of caramel, salted caramel notes go into this, so it pairs really well with the maple syrup. I got the idea for this recipe as well from Difference. I'll put a link down below to their website. They recommended using a different kind of bitters, but for me, for my old fashions, I always use Angostura and orange because I think those flavors just work really well when making a cocktail. And speaking of making the cocktail, it's time to, well, make the cocktail. It is an old fashioned, so we're gonna be stirring it in our mixing glass. I'm gonna pop a nice rock of ice into there before we measure out the rest of our ingredients. I'm gonna start off with my maple syrup because maple syrup is quite thick, quite sticky. Sometimes it can get stuck at the bottom of your mixing glass, of your measuring cup even. So using it first, getting the other ingredients through there will help kind of wash it out and make sure you get it all into your final cocktail. Gonna go in with about a quarter of an ounce, so about 7.5 milliliters. There, just like that, just into there. This, I know it might seem like a very small amount, but 7.5 mil, just over a teaspoon, will give you a lot of flavor into the final cocktail. And like I said, some of it is going to be caught in there, so by using the rest of our ingredients, we'll wash it out. Next up, it's our port wine. Like I said, this is a ruby port wine. You can use whatever port you can get your hands on. It's going to be all relatively similar, but I quite like this bright, fresh ruby port. Going to go in with 3/4 of an ounce, or about 22.5 mil, just into there, just like that. Pop that into our mixing glass before we get the rest of our ingredients. Well, our last main ingredient, which is our whiskey. This is, like I said, a cask strength whiskey coming in at 59.9% alcohol. So if this was a lower strength, I might go in with, let's say, 60 mil of it. If it was like a 45% whiskey, I go in with 60 mil of it. But because it's so high proof, I'm gonna go in with just 1.5 ounces, so 45 mil of my whiskey, because otherwise that high proof will overpower the other ingredients, and we don't really want that. We want our cocktail to be balanced at the end of the day. So that there was 45 mil or 1.5 ounces, but if you have a lower proof whiskey, you can of course use a more amount if you want. And then it's just going to go in with my bitters. I like personally 1 dash of Angostura followed by 1 dash of orange. Nice and simple, nice and straightforward, but I think that just adds a nice kind of balance to any old fashioned I make, and that's typically where I aim if I'm making an old fashioned. Now, I'm going to stir it down for about 30 seconds just till everything gets nice and chilled. Okay, I can feel from the outside of my glass that this is nicely chilled now, so we're going to be ready to strain it out. We're going to put it in a rocks glass on top of another nice fresh rock of ice, but we're going to be just straining it out up on top of that. Nice and simple. Get our strainer up top and pour it out, and you can see that port has had a really great influence. That color, that bright red, has really traveled through into the final cocktail, but we're not fully finished yet because we're going to garnish it. I like just going in a little bit of a dried orange peel because port has these lovely kind of Christmassy, almost dried citrus notes, so a little bit of a dried orange peel into there, just like that. And that right there is how I make a port old fashioned. Now real quick, before I taste this cocktail, if you're new here, scroll down, hit that thumbs up button, hit that subscribe button. I put out whiskey reviews like the review of that Teeling whiskey every Wednesday, and I put out cocktail recipes like this cocktail every Friday. So if you want to see more, make sure you hit subscribe. Cheers. Oh, that's lovely. It's really rich, it's dense. The fruitiness from the port comes through and it balances the whiskey. I think like there's a lot of whiskey flavor coming through. I think if I had gone in with a full 2 ounces of that really high proof whiskey, it probably would have overpowered the other flavors, but now it's nicely balanced. The port adds some really nice fruity, rich berry notes, which complements the whiskey, and that maple syrup as well adds a little bit of kind of like texture, a little bit of caramel, maple notes, as well as a little bit of oak, and that comes through really well, complementing the whiskey. The touch of orange bitters, the touch of the kind of orange peel in there, gives a lovely bit of flavor, rounds it out really nicely. Like it's recognizably an old fashioned, but it's definitely a riff on it. It's definitely a bit fun, a bit different. If you like old fashions, you should definitely try this out, especially as we're approaching the winter, because for me, I love a good hot port. I love using port in cocktails around winter time because it adds that nice fruity kind of wine note. And it just works really well here. If you have any other kind of winter cocktails you like, let me know down below and I might just make them. But in the meantime, I'm gonna keep on enjoying this and I'll see you next time. Sláinte.